to the women who were delivering babies. So, Semmelweis taught us to wash our hands. But, did I mention to you the fact that Semmelweis insisted that his medical students and physicians wash their hands in chlorinated lime solution until the cadaver smell was gone from their hands. Mortality rates dropped dramatically, but it didn't change practices in the hospital much because everybody laughed at him. They said, oh, that Semmelweis guy, a little obsessive compulsive with the hand washing. He ended up in an insane asylum and died 10 years later. So they made fun of him because it took too much time to stop and wash your hands, and they still didn't get the connection that the germs were being transmitted on hands. So they didn't think that washing hands was necessary, even after infection rates dropped. They blamed it on fate, the gods, whatever they blame things on. Alrighty. So, following Semmelweis was another doctor named Dr. Lister. Lister was actually a surgeon. And Dr. Lister had read some work of Pasteur's. So he knew about the experiment where he showed that animalcules are actually in the air. They don't spontaneously generate. They come from somewhere. They're already there in the environment, and they can be in the air. So Lister's a surgeon, and here's his patient split open on the operating table, and he's been reading about animalcules in the air that drop down into the swan neck flask. And he realizes these animalcules could be dropping into his patient's surgical wounds while he has them open, and he's operating on them. This might explain why the operation was a success, but the patient died. Because the patient died of post-surgical infection, post-op infection. It's not uncommon, especially in those days. So, Dr. Lister actually developed some aseptic techniques. So Semmelweis gets credit for hand washing, which is an aseptic technique. Lister gets credit for other aseptic techniques. He's like, you know, maybe that Semmelweis guy wasn't so nuts after all. Maybe if I have my nurses spray this solution over the atmosphere in the operating room while we're operating, it will kill the animalcules in the air. They won't drop down into my patient and cause an infection in my patient. And while we're at it, maybe the hand washing thing wouldn't be a bad idea. Won't slow us down that much. And let's see, instead of reusing bandages, because in those days, you know, cotton was premium. Not, you know, people had like one set of clothes unless you were really wealthy, and then you had three, you know. So cotton for bandages was kind of extravagant. So let's say that guy, oh, he's just about healed up. Take that bandage off of him, it's still pretty good, but put it on this guy. Well, that's just too disgusting to even think about, but to them it was nothing. It's like, it's cotton, it's good cotton, let's use, okay, what if we like washed the bandage first and then put it on the other patient? And you know those scalpels and things? Maybe we should throw them in the wash too. So Lister came up with certain aseptic techniques. A peculiarity came out of this, rubber gloves. because while Lister and his surgeons were operating under this mist of carbolic acid, which is what they used to clean the air in the OR, the mist would drop down on their hands and sting and burn and give them really chapped hands, because they'd be for hours underneath this mist, and the nurses were like, oh my God, how long is this damn operation going to be? So they invented rubber gloves to protect their hands from the antiseptic. Isn't that bizarre? The origin of rubber gloves. So, what happened was, Lister's patients started actually living through the surgery a greater percentage of the time. Now, let's say your family member is injured or needs an operation, or you are injured or need an operation, and Dr. Lister has a 9 in 10 survival rate after operation, and the average survival rate is like 4 in 10. Who are you going to? I think I'll be going to Dr. Lister, thank you very much. So Dr. Lister started getting more patients and making more money. That's why doctors started following him in his aseptic techniques. And yes, they did see infection rates go down dramatically. However, these are all just sort of indirect correlations that show that you can operate aseptically and cut down on infection. You can wash your hands and interrupt the transmission of disease. Maybe there's something to this animalcule research of Pasteur's, where animalcules don't spontaneously generate. Disease doesn't spontaneously generate. It actually comes from somewhere and can be transmitted on dirty instruments, dirty bandages, on dirty hands, and even in the air if you leave your patient exposed to the open air. And actually, way back in Civil War times even, hospitals were open air institutions because they felt that the fresh air coming in the building had healing properties. So you are laying in the hospital bed and all the doors and windows are wide open and dust is blowing in and you've got wounds and stuff, you know, could leave you open to all kinds of stuff getting in your hands. Okay, the reason we brought up Semmelweis and Lister was because the third thing that led to the development of microbiology as a science was the concern over disease transmission. Remember that? We were on concern over disease transmission. So the first thing we talked about was development of the early microscope, and von Leeuwenhoek gets credit for using his little microscopic lenses of like 200 magnification to see and explain, describe in a newsletter, scientific newsletter, creatures that were too small to be seen without the microscopic lenses. A second thing that led to the development of microbiology as a science was the controversy over spontaneous generation. They thought that flies spontaneously generated from a deer carcass, or they thought that animalcules spontaneously generated in their stew pots. But Pasteur did the final experiment to disprove the theory of spontaneous generation, even though people had thought that way since Aristotle's time. And the third thing that led to the development of microbiology as a science was the concern over disease transmission. So with happenings like Semmelweis and Lister's interruption of the transmission of the disease, they're starting to understand how disease is transmitted. And that disease comes from somewhere. It comes from these animalcules. We're actually going to stop this discussion here, but I want to add the third part of it, and we'll come back to that in a couple of days, because I got a whole bunch of other crap I want to tell you. Okay, so the third thing that we're going to come back to, somebody reminds me, when someday I'll be like, where did we leave off? We're going to say that Koch, then we're going to go to Koch's postulates. And Koch's postulates is covered in a few pages in chapter 14, actually. And Koch's postulates is actually a direct correlation. So these are sort of indirect correlations of germs with disease. And it's like, how can anybody be that ignorant that you don't even know that germs cause disease, right? But there were. In fact, when I was a little kid, I never heard of E. coli. And now if you ask any little kid, hey dude, what's E. coli? That's bacteria. They know, because we got all this stuff on TV and the internet, and so people are much better informed. Koch's postulates is actually a direct correlation of the same thing. This direct correlation is the proof, let's say, or the demonstration, let's say, for the germ theory of disease. No one particular guy gets credit for the germ theory of disease. It's just a theory that came about by all these researchers doing all this research. And in fact, Pasteur and Koch himself and other researchers like Bassi and I can't even think of the other guys' names, they were looking at diseases of potatoes, for example. If you have a potato blight, you're going to have a famine. That's not good, because then who's going to pay taxes? Right? It's a problem. So they go to Dr. Pasteur and say, like, hey, you got to help solve this problem. We got to fix the potato blight. What's causing potato blight? How do we stop it from ever happening again? Because I can't let all the peasants die and the farmers don't have any crop, and because I need somebody to pay taxes. So this is a direct correlation for the germ theory of disease, as Koch's postulates. And also in there were things like discovering that potato blight is actually caused by a fungus. Every case of potato that has potato blight, you're going to find the same fungus on it. Silkworms. Not only was cotton at a premium, silk, don't forget about it. That was the most luxurious thing in the world. That was very expensive. If you could make silk, buy silk, sell silk, that's money. We're talking money and we're talking revenue. Taxes too. So if your silkworms all got sick and died, you were going to be asking somebody like Dr. Pasteur to do what's up with that. So they would look at silkworms and they'd see the same protozoan in every single silkworm. So they're starting to make the connection. This animalcule causes that disease in silkworms. That little critter, it's a fungus actually, causes that disease in potatoes, and stuff like that. So you're starting to put the pieces together. Koch puts the big piece together by coming up with Koch's postulates. And Koch's postulates is actually like the proof or the foundation for the germ theory of disease. Whoops, where's my pen? So we'll call it the proof or the foundation for the germ theory of disease. What's the germ theory of disease? This. Germs cause disease. Like, that's astounding. And it shows a direct correlation. And the direct correlation is that this one germ causes that disease. A different germ causes a different disease. Okay. So when we come back, we'll come back to Koch's postulates. And in the meantime, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to tell you about. So that's what we're going to do. All right. I'm going to start with these posters that you might be a little bit familiar with from lab. So in a way, this is kind of a review.